the structural issues that you and I spoke about a year ago, every single one is as bad or worse. It's just that the atmosphere changed because there came clearly a relief. Uh, but that relief is waning. And I really think in a few weeks' time, unless he is capable of pulling rabbits out of a hat, but unless there's a rabbit pulled out of the hat, I think we're going to start to see the issues come about.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Collapse Life. I'm your host, Zahra Sethna, and I'm very pleased to have you with us. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to please hit the like and subscribe buttons now. With trade wars and tariffs and sky high prices across the board, optimism about the economy is at near record lows right now. Consumers are bracing for uncertainty, and many people are asking if we're already in a recession. So there's no better person to help us unpack all this than the original Wall Street whiz kid, our friend and all around mensch, Peter Grandich. Peter's been warning about the coming financial storm for years now. So today we wanted to check in on where things stand and how the smart people are positioning themselves in these turbulent waters. Peter, welcome back. It's great to see you as always.
Always a pleasure to speak to you. After 40 some years, you can let interviews come mundane, but when I speak to you, it never it is. So I look forward to it.
Thank you so much. And it's only been a couple of weeks since we last spoke when you invited me onto your channel. So thank you so much for that. That was a great conversation. But so much is happening right now on a day by day basis that I figured it was a good chance to check back in and give people a bit of an overview from your expert perspective of what is going on. And one of the big things that's happened since we last spoke is the downgrade by Moody's of the US from its pristine AAA credit rating. So tell us about that. How do you interpret it? What are the implications of it?
Well, first, they're very late to the to the ball game. Two other groups similar to do work to them have already done it, and so it really didn't have. It made a little bit of a news event, but people knew it was overdue. The real trick would have been going straight to single A, uh, because that's probably more where it's deserving to be at and all. But what I just think it did is it gave us, those of us, and we're still in a very small minority in America that recognize the severity of what America's gotten us into in terms of debt. It's not any one particular group, either the aisle side of political or any one administration, although in recent years it's accelerated. And the difficulty now is, although there are some positive attributes to give to Trump, he's by no means any person that's going to look to lower that level. In fact, I believe he's making another crucial mistake, a mistake that's historic in his own work, and that is taking on too much debt in hopes that growth would be so large that it would compensate for that debt. And I think we're too late in the game here in America to hope for that. And I think it's just going to be another reason to be very, very concerned of the debt, not just on the government level, but also corporate and especially consumer.
Yeah. So what happens? I mean, if there's no way to dig out from that debt conundrum, what happens? I mean, it becomes a weight that just forces collapse, doesn't it?
Well, it's the old saying, it's going to get a lot worse before it can get better.
Uh-huh.
And I may not even be around. I certainly don't believe I'll be around, just based on my age of 69, that I'll ever be around when its good old days are back again, if they're ever to come back again.
Mhm.
It's going to take a generation or more to work through such a large number. It's surprising, but again, because of the number I'm about to note, it's why most people won't even focus on what we're talking about. Two-thirds of Americans are working paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
Their literally biggest and only concern is, can I get to work next week? Because I have to, because it's the only way I'm going to pay for rent, I'm going to pay for food, I'm going to pay for our car loans, et cetera, et cetera. And to sit around and think about how's my government going to pay off $36 trillion is preposterous. There will never be enough disposable income after Americans are done paying for necessities to ever produce enough cash flow to pay that back. You know, Trump was making some preposterous comments a couple months ago when the thing was kicking around about gold, that he sees the debt being paid off as well. I mean, It's just not a number that's going to happen because it's a mathematical impossibility.
Right.
Now, eventually, there will be a necessity to deal with it because eventually, and that's what the era we're entering into now. And I don't want to take you away from where you might have been heading in the
No,
interview,
go ahead.
but no, and I don't because you do a wonderful interview, by the way. So I rather stick with you'll be much better with good questions than I can come up with. But what I do want to point out is one of the concerns as you and I speak here today on Tuesday the 20th, we just seen the Japanese bond market have its worst ever reaching of a yield, and they're in actually more trouble than we are, if it's imaginable, on their ability to pay this humongous debt that they have. And we're seeing it there. We're seeing it here in the US, despite all this great talk and supposedly about trade and all. Our long bond ticked above 5% again, our 10 years ticking above 4.5 again. And what I'm getting at is the concern is not going to be any more about can we pay off the debt? It's going to become can we even make the interest payments?
Right.
And with this one big bill or whatever they title they're given to it, many independent groups see another $5 to $7 trillion being added to that 36 trillion. So how do we start servicing 40 or 50 trillion dollars in debt at just a 5% interest rate? You know, the best we've ever done uh, a couple years ago, we would almost half of our income would have to go to service this future debt of ours. How
Right.
can we still run a military and do all the services? And we have a president that's talking about, well, you don't have to pay taxes anymore, and you don't have to pay taxes anymore, and all. And and then the biggest asset that most Americans don't know this. I know you do, but most Americans don't know what our biggest asset is. You ask typical American now, what's the biggest asset American owns? And they start talking about parks and buildings and all. And when you tell them student loans, which are over 25% of this of on our asset sheet, and we're seeing two-thirds of them having difficulty paying it,
Right.
there's a lot of concerns that are being overlooked right now. And I understand it. People want optimism after the 4 years we just went through. We're now seeing now what clearly was the worst presidency and administration, not only in modern times, probably forever. And now we're realizing that there might have been even a lot worse things occurring because the man may have never been really in charge to begin with,
Hmm.
and all the things that are going to come out of that if they're to come out. And also, I think the concern for people should not be where the stock market is going, but where the bond market is going, because that's going to impact our future much more than anything that happens in the stock market.
So you gave me perfect entree because my next question was going to be about something that I just read that the Fed is buying billions of dollars in bonds, and that some people are interpreting that as a form of sort of stealth quantitative easing. So help people understand what's going on there.
Yeah, and it's monetizing the debt. That's exactly what that's the expectation. The expectation will be is we'll never want to go through another depression like atmosphere where deflation takes over and everybody is in the street without a job. So the vision is that eventually it become highly inflationary, devalue. Now, one of the surprises, we don't know this yet, but it's in the back of my mind and some good people that I listen to that I think are way smarter than I am. And that is that the United States is going to end up using its gold holding to offer out bonds backed by the gold in
Hmm.
order to not have to pay the much higher interest rates that otherwise they may have to. Uh, and also revaluing the gold will free up $1 trillion or so on the books.
Do
But
we even know if that gold exists, though?
well, that's the other thing. And then what? Here's another. And we can do conspiracy. We can talk to the cows come home tonight and never get through this. But here's the other thing. Somebody made a very good point to me and said, when Trump first talked about going to Fort Knox and looking at it, somebody might have told him, we don't think it's there. That's why he stopped talking about it. Because the worst thing that could ever happen would be kind of like the Jimmy Hoffa, Geraldo Rivera thing when he went to open what everybody thought was Jimmy Hoffa's secret safe and nothing was in it. So,
Yeah.
but even if we do revalue gold, even if we do use gold, the bond situation is the problem. And here's the problem may not look evident today, but if you and I are blessed to live another year and have that conversation 1 year from today, we'll definitely be able to say we were correct on what I'm about to say. And that is, all this trade war fighting is going to make foreigners less interested net in America going forward, then more interested. And including with that will be less interest in buying our debt compared to what they used to. So the Fed and the US citizens are going to have to do more to self fund this debt and deficits to their own peril, which is
Right.
going to make things twice as bad. So it's not a pretty picture. Most people don't want to hear it. And let me just tell you this, it does zero for my financial planning business, because when people start to realize this, they only want to do two things. They want to crawl into a shell or run away fast as possible from Peter
Mm.
Grandich. But it is something I think people need to be prepared for.
So, yeah, we've got a trade war. The downgrade of the AAA rating is also not going to be particularly favorable on our outlook to the rest of the world. People no longer need to buy our debt as they used to, as we move away from the dollars being the world reserve currency. So, um, all of these things that this administration talked about, with tariffs and the Doge cuts and all of those things, were supposed to fix the problem. But obviously, most people believed that it wasn't really going to. But at least there was some effort there. We're a few months in, and some of those things are looking like they're falling apart. Talk a little bit about the tariffs and also Doge and what's happening.
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, Trump is a phenomenal spin master. If I can get him to just run the IR of a junior company that I'm invested in, I'd be much happier, because he is the spinner beyond. He makes things look a lot better than they may be. But the bottom line is, you're right. You hit on a very good point, and I think we're going to live to regret that certain people went and tried to destroy Tesla and destroy a guy that really had no need to do what he was doing. He's the world's richest man. I don't know where he ranks now, if he still is or whatever. But he just rolled up his sleeve and came one of the guys and brought in young guys. And before you know it, within weeks, they discovered unbelievable amounts of mismanagement, to describe it minimally, not even talking about potential fraud and all. And what no one talked about, all these government divisions that they found these things in, they all had inspector generals who also had staffs that were supposed to be all these years finding these things, so they would never get to the level that they did it. So the
Mhm.
corruption and all is so deep and so verse and spread among everybody, not doesn't matter what political region you're in. And here's this guy coming in and people threatening to kill him and so forth. And you know what? I can understand why he eventually had to back away. And like you said, all that initial excitement and deficits were going to shrink and all. And that's probably why some of them aren't happy with Rand Paul, but he's correct in what he's saying. We went from caring about reducing the deficits to now we're going to make them even much higher so we can get this great bill across and all. And listen, it's shameful, because the man identified corruption to a level that I'm afraid if they went further, what they would have found and so forth. And the fact that so many people were kicking up. And then you tie in the tariff news, okay?
Yeah.
So I personally, first of all, I must say this. I am neither a MAGA flag waver, nor am I have any part of this syndrome of hating Trump. I'm in
Mhm.
the middle. And for quite a while, that's been the worst place to be, because both sides think I'm in the wrong place. Okay. But I commend the president for a few things. First of all, what he did on immigration, which was an absolute necessity. And look how fast and he fixed that issue in terms of it getting worse and worse. And it showed you what the previous group really was all about. They weren't doing it. We know the reasons why they wanted to have it in. The second thing that occurred in the Middle East is phenomenal. Doesn't mean we're home yet. Doesn't mean it's going to work the way it looked like a week or so ago. But it really was a change, and a change potentially for the better for the most geopolitical sensitive place going back to biblical times. We don't know yet, but it's clearly, and he's put in a position to where Iran has to make a big decision.
Mhm.
They have to view as what they would view as cave or risk. Is this guy willing to actually go the other way and try to annihilate us? And it's no doubt in my mind that these Arab countries have given Trump their support if he has to go that route. They just can't
Mhm.
say it themselves and all. But getting past that is, I think he's made a major blunder on the trade end. He came out as a bully at a time when we already know for a couple decades that countries around the world were pulling away from America,
Yeah.
not just because of our military or whatever, because we see it in the dollar, the de-dollarization, the less and less usage of the dollar. We talked about BRICS. We've seen other groups forming and all. And instead of coming out and saying, hey, listen, I understand the world has changed and all, but you guys got to be a little bit, you got to play a little bit better ball with us. Let's sit together and see if we could. I think that would have been a lot better than I'm basically going to chop you off at the knees if you don't do this, that, and the other. And his expectation was within hours, if not days, the world was going to run to him. And they haven't. No matter
Yeah.
what you want to listen to, the media that supports President in the US, just read everything else elsewhere, which I do has been doing that for decades to make sure I get the world's opinion, not just the US's.
Right.
Most feel that he's blinked and he's caused the issues. And look how many weeks it's already happened now. It's off the back burner. In fact, just a couple of days ago, they came out and said, well, I think we're just going to come out with a standard tariff. Well, if everybody's running to you and can't wait to make a deal, why would you come up with a standard tariff?
Right.
And I think that's going to come back to bite him. And one of the ways it's going to bite him is they're not going to buy our debt in the way that they used to, or it's going to have to be at a much higher interest rate in order for them to be wanting to do that, which means the dollar is going to have to go dramatically lower as well.
Mhm.
And look at the things that happened during this. And this, again, is not discussed. There were no two mortal enemies in the world than China and Japan. If
Mhm.
anybody knows the history between those two countries, you'll know how they did not want anything to do with each other. And because of this, not only did they meet together, but South Korea joined to form an alliance now to trade among themselves that didn't exist before this trade war. Then look at China with Europe, where they both agreed to drop their tariffs and now speak and talk about how more can we work together. And let's look to our best allies. Our best ally is north of us, Canada. And I have
Mhm.
a prejudicial there. It was a home away from home for me. It's the most similar like country in the world like ours. I don't have to say you and your husband lived there for a while. You know that.
Yeah.
And I have Canadian friends now that basically say to me, we still like you, Peter, but we can't stand the United States anymore. We're not going there to buy anything. We're not going there for vacation. And they're not. Talk to
Mhm.
anybody in tourism on border states like New York, Vermont, Washington. They're not, Canadians are purposely not coming here. Now,
Yeah.
come next January when it's cold and they want to go to Florida, I think they're still going to do that. But what I'm just saying is we've alienated a lot more people than we've going to gain from anything that we're going to gain on the trade.
Right.
And Trump is good in spinning and getting that focus away, but I think we'll see that in the next several months, and we're going to see it very, very soon in prices. We're
Right.
already seeing prices ticking up in places like Walmart and all, where somebody might have paid $2 for something a couple of days ago, and now it's $3.
Yeah.
And as that becomes more widespread, so I think what we're going to eventually see in the next couple of weeks is that he's going to back away from that and say, okay, I'm going to give them a break and I'm going to bring it down to such and such a level. But he really bit off more than he can chew, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like you said, it may come back to bite him, but in the meantime, the pinch is being felt by the average American. People, as you already said, were already struggling. And now this trade war is going to make things more difficult. Debt levels are increasing, student loan, automotive delinquencies, credit cards, the incredible use of buy now, pay later schemes. So, um, and as you said, like things are already starting to show on the shelves. There's higher prices, there's fewer things available. I mean, it's starting to become palpable. Are we going to see now a rash of bankruptcies, of defaults? I mean, are we going to start seeing that coming in the next couple of months, do you think?
So, first of all, you brought up a very good point that hasn't been spoken of how much more average Americans have to use things like buy now and pay later for the simplest things of
Yeah.
just typical food to eat during the course of a day. So that brings us to two, and one thing that's kind of a pet project of mine in my latter years. One is the fact that 1 out of 4 of Americans, or half of the bottom 50% of earners, no matter how you want to look at it, are now using credit cards to get by and pay for daily things, rent,
Hmm.
gas, insurance, etc., things that live day by day. Eventually, even if you make the minimum payments on those credit cards, they become, you can't even make the minimum soon. And that's one of the reasons where they're heading. The other one that's closer to the heart is for my wife and I think all people of all races and creeds and colors are called upon this. This is a universal calling, and that is so many more people are struggling just to eat each day.
Yeah.
Food banks throughout North America, this is clear in Canada as well, and you can easily check it by just searching and seeing, are seeing 5 to 10 fold increase in the numbers of people showing up for food. And over half, an example, my wife and I have gotten very involved in a very local food pantry by us. And they've seen in 5 years a tenfold increase in the amount of families that they're servicing. But what's really alarming in that is now well over half the people online, if you want to call it, are both working.
Yeah.
It's not just people that have fallen on hard times and were struggling and all. And
And probably working more than one job and still not able to make ends meet.
absolutely and all. And now the
Mhm.
big question is for here in New Jersey, this next month, we see a 20% average increase in our electrical bills.
Wow.
And for some people, that's going to be the difference of not only do I keep the lights on, but forget about air conditioning because I can't, have to open the windows to eat if I have the air conditioning. But it's
Yeah.
going to make a decision on some of the things to pay for, and that is for me uh, the untold story. And let me go back to something I think that might help in the picture where I know your mindset because I read you and your husband's work all the time, and that is something that our Secretary Treasurer brought out the point, and I didn't even know it to the extent of when he brought it out several weeks ago. He made a very interesting comment, and it turns out to be absolutely true that the top 10% wealthiest people in America own 86% of all assets. And the next 40% of people own the remaining 14%. And half Americans doesn't own anything.
Yeah.
So it gave me two thoughts when I learned that and verified it. One, man, I better start watching what the top 10% are doing because those are the people that are going to impact asset prices.
Right.
And there, what's interesting is they've been sellers of American assets on general. In fact, there's more of an exiting by these type of wealthy people out of the United States than ever before.
As in with their money or they're physically moving out of the
Money
country?
and their physicality moving out and all. And
Wow.
that's why also it became that golden thing that they were plugging early on that if you want to come to America and give us 5 million or whatever the
Yeah.
goal was to make up.
To
Uh,
replace all our millionaires and
well,
billionaires who are leaving.
when somebody's willing to give up, and I don't think the rich people actually lose this because they've intertwined their monies away, but supposedly you lose 35% of your wealth if you give up your citizenship, when you exit. That's kind of like the penalty for losing your citizenship. I don't think they should charge you if I don't want to be an American, but that's what happens. But I think the other thing that was important in that is to recognize that that's the problem of Wall Street. So Wall Street analysts and all that community, they're really focused on that top 10 and they give some to that other group,
Right.
but they don't take into account that bottom half and how could that end up not letting these people make as much as what they're expecting to make because those are the people that are going to buy all this stuff that companies make money off of. The people keep buying Apple, cell phones and whatever the hot stocks are and things of that nature. And if the masses are having such difficulties of even putting food on the table and
Yeah.
have no real assets, remember, if 2/3 of people are working paycheck to paycheck, the big thing in financial services, retirement planning. If you look, that's the biggest single thing that financial service firms offer and focus on. Well, 2/3 of Americans are never going to live that. wonderful dream, which is a man-made myth, by the way.
Right.
Nothing biblical about retirement. But the fact is, working 75 or 85% of your life to live the last 15 to 25% in some sort of luxury, two-thirds of Americans are never going to experience that. But on
Right.
top of that, which no one wants to talk about on Wall Street, mostly don't want to talk about, is as those people age, which that boomer group that I'm in is and has to keep on working, they're going to do one thing certain. They're going to turn to the government to ask for more help and assistance at a time
Hmm.
when the country is having more and more difficult just paying its national debt. So there's a lot of things that aren't discussed, nor will be discussed, because it's not palatable, it's not saleable, it's not going to help financial assets being sold. But why people like you and I hopefully have been chosen and led by fate to talk about these things so people can at least have some idea how to potentially prepare in case plan A, because that's all you get in financial services. Plan A. There's no plan B or plan C. And unfortunately, when 80% of money managers underperform simply putting your money in an index fund, you may want to think about plan Bs and Cs if you're using financial service people to help you.
Yeah. I mean, but now, you've just laid out a pretty bleak picture. Most people are living paycheck to paycheck. A lot of people have no retirement plan or a very thin one, which may not get them through their natural lifespan. um Buy now pay later, as we talked about already, it's now becoming buy now pay never. There was a survey of people who have used these types of loans, and more than 40% said that they have struggled to pay those back. And one of the leading providers of buy now pay later loans is actually losing millions of dollars. So this is now, things are becoming thinner and more fragile than even before, even last year when we were speaking. And you called this. I mean, this doesn't come as a surprise, but it is going to hit a lot of people, whether they saw it coming or not. And when that happens, it's going to affect all of us because we're all interconnected in this way. It's going to be not good in a very short amount of time. Isn't that right?
It's interesting you say that because from that point till now, things only did get worse. But the relief of Biden or Harris, especially losing, and Trump coming in, which you had to have at least some spirit of hope lifted, was clear. Listen, like I said, I'm not a MAGA person, but anybody that thought that Harris could do a better job, they should than Trump. They shouldn't be listening to me or you if that's what they actually think. But
Hmm.
something I want to bring out about the retirement because that's what been sold on. Two things I think are critical now about retirement and retirement planning. In fact, I just wrote about it a few days ago and made a special commentary about it. One is for the first time ever, more retirees or soon to be retirees fear running out of money more than actually passing away.
Yeah.
Dying was always the number one fear, or concern about how they're going to handle it. But the other thing that I've seen, in a planning group now for over 25 years, when people came and they had retired already or were close to retiring, they didn't have mortgage debt. Their house was at least paid off for most of the people that I've sat with. Now they're coming in with very large scale debt for their age.
Yeah.
Part of that is because they live the lifestyle, which I still see 7 out of 10 families doing above what they're paying for. They spend more than they make, and it should be the opposite. But the other is that they've had to help others, including their own children. I'm in a
Yeah.
55 and over community, and I can't tell you how many families now I've seen where their children, one or more, come back to live with them, either through divorce or from other reasons and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
And these are all the things that aren't discussed each day. But I'll tell you this, the structural issues that you and I spoke about a year ago, every single one is as bad or worse. It's just that the atmosphere changed because there came clearly a relief. Uh,
Yeah.
but that relief is waning. And I really think in a few weeks' time, unless he is capable of pulling rabbits out of a hat, but unless there's a rabbit pulled out of the hat, I think we're going to start to see the issues come about with higher prices, more lean. Look, a lot of economics are clearly pointed to recession. They just fudged the employment numbers again. We caught them. People went through it and saw how they did it. They changed. The government changes its birth model and suddenly created a phantom 400,000 new jobs were created in that 1 month in order to give us the rise that it had. But
Oh
I think
dear.
time is short, and the problem now is the dis that I don't want to dislike is not the right word. The absolute hatred that a certain segment of American society has against Trump is
Yeah.
unlike anything I've ever witnessed. Even looking at Yankee fans that hate Mets or Maple Leaf guys that hate Canadians and will always hate them no matter what. But the level of hatred, especially since it looks like he's done some good things, especially has driven people to such levels. You know, uh, I said this the day after the election. I wrote about it and I said, anybody that thinks this group that's disliked this man since the day he came down that escalator in 2016 and said he was going to run for president, because the same group that hated him that day loved him just the day before
Yeah.
he wasn't running. But if you thought they were going away after this election, going, okay, we tried, we lost, we're moving on. I said, no, it's going to get 10 times worse. It's going to get violent and it's going to get deadly.
You
And
did say
I'm
that.
afraid we've not seen that yet. And I'm afraid that I don't want to see it to say, hey, I told you so. But
Right.
I think it's one of the reasons why we saw Musk back away. I think he recognized his life was really in danger. These people, there are people out there that would kill him. And now we have a guy that used to run the FBI and he can come up with all the excuses he wants. You think I'm stupid? I don't think you came across and just happened to find these shells in the ground and you just happened to take a picture and you were just showing it for a goof off.
Yeah.
And then what did it do? We're seeing protests. Okay, they're not very large. It's not like 10,000 people in each city, but there's enough kooks among those crowds that are going to think, well, maybe I can solve this problem because we already know two tried.
Right.
And again, I pray to God that I'm wrong on this, but I do think the violence itself is going to come worse. And there is no middle or right to the Democratic Party anymore. You know, they used to be considered conservative Democrats, especially from the South. If they are, they've been so silent. And when you see the people that are leading and what they're calling for and all, and they here's where most people turn off. And if we get turned off, I'm sorry I caused this on your fine show. But this is the thing 99% of people on Wall Street won't mention. I believe it's demonic. I believe there's a spiritual warfare. It's been going on since Jesus went to the cross and did what he did.
Yeah.
It's now more pronounced. And these actions that people are taking are no longer just humans with a bad day. There's demonic forces that are happening. And if people don't believe in that, they just think you're a kook. And I understand that.
Yeah.
But no human can beat a demonic force. And therefore, the biggest question I get from people, well, what do you think eventually solves it? Maybe that was going to be a question. I don't want to jump to the end. But I believe unless God intervenes now in the United States, we're just going down a rabbit hole that it's only going to get worse and worse. And I hope someday somebody can say, "What a fool you were, Grandich! You were so wrong. Look how Nirvana has returned to America."
Yeah.
But I wouldn't bet on it. I certainly am not betting with my own and my finances and anybody that entrusts me to their finances.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that however you want to define it, there are forces at work that are much greater than the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party or whoever's in office. I mean, I think you're definitely right that there are factions on both sides who are intent on battling each other. But I think what people have to realize is more and more those types of binary arguments are just not useful. The situation that you described of prices increasing at Walmart and people going to the food bank and not having enough money to pay your student loan or your rent, those things are not going to change regardless of whatever political party you prefer over another one. So I think we have to help people understand the things that they can control and not be so distracted by the other things, which very, very possibly most often are there for a reason. They're trying to distract us with things like the seashells on the beach so that we're not noticing the cooked up jobs numbers and other things like that. So, it's good to have that conversation and help people kind of really ground themselves back to what's actually happening and what they can do about it, the things that you can control, which you always say, get yourself out of debt, number one, um, and don't live beyond your means. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but yeah, I think I know, your basic bits of advice. So yeah, I mean, I think for the average household, um, while we can be distracted by these other issues, there are much more pressing concerns on a daily basis, aren't there?
Sure. Yeah. So the deal is to start at home. That's where it's all going to have to start if there is a virtual turnaround. It's great that you want to go out and try to change the world, but let's first change ourselves. And like I said, 7 or 8 out of 10 families that still come into our planning group, everyday working people, right up to some people that are in that top 10%, and the athletes that I once deal with a lot, and still occasionally I get referred to one. I find 7 out of 10 of them living at least one or two lifestyles above their income. And the way they do it is two ways. They incur debt and they defer savings to the proper places. They defer savings in general for their retirement, savings uh, for a rainy day. Look at the statistics that are out there. 2/3 of Americans don't even have $1,000 saved for an emergency. So one of the things we do is we have to start at home, and one of the ways you start at home is you actually create a budget. And most people still have not done this. And I always tell them when they first sit down, for the next 30 or 60 days, write down every penny you spend at the end of the night that you spent in the day, for no matter what it is, even if it's so normal to you. And then look at it after 30 or 60 days, and then see if there's places there where that can be lessened or eliminated. And they're shocked to find out that it is. And then when you show them just on between $100 and $300 a month of savings and times it over 20 or 30 years with a normal interest rate, how much more they end up with, they get an incentive. Oh, wow, I didn't realize that. And then, of course, once you start spending less than you make, then you're able to save. The second thing is that ask yourself, is it a need or is it a desire? And the guy who's the most unreligious guy in the world to listen to, because he was not a religious man at all, in fact, he hated religion, George Carlin, still has one of the best skits of all times called Too Much Stuff. And I always like to say that the perfect poster child for that, no fault of their own, they weren't dishonest, honest business, is the public storage industry.
Yeah.
We didn't have that as kids. Our parents never needed a public storage. Yet you can't drive 2, 3, 4 miles on any main road without seeing one now. And our
Yeah.
dwellings are much bigger. So we had more room to store our stuff, but we still paying somebody to store our extra
Yeah.
stuff. So the other
Yeah.
thing is do we have too much stuff? And George Carlin is a great routine. I tell people, I actually send it to people to understand that, do we need all this stuff? And when you start to take that back in, and one of the things I've always heard, and it's hard for people to do, it is biblically unsound. There's no positive verse in the Bible about debt. There's just warnings. And quite frankly, people that get out of debt or at least lessen it, all they have is positive things to say at the end. They
Hmm.
feel a mental lifting, a relief, a sense of, and I meet people say, I want to enter the market and all, and I find they're paying off 18% interest rate cards. And I said, well, I can make you 18% right now. Just pay off your cards and you'll save 18%. So I think there are a lot of things we could do first on our own.
Yeah.
But we are handicapped and we still live in society. And the problem I have now with society, which we didn't even get into, is it's clearly corrupt on both ends of the aisle. So many of these people in Congress have been taking such advantage of insider trading, uh, paying family people's getting projects,
Yeah.
sent to them and so forth and so on. And that's out of our control, except that if we get to the point and say enough is enough. And we're not there yet. I don't see blood in the streets over that. but I do think that everything's going to have to start at home. And we can no longer count on the U.S. as the power in the world and to live
Yeah.
through the cheapness that we made our dollar and the borrowing that we had. It's coming home to roost. And unfortunately, the younger you are, the more you're going to pay for that. And that's why I think you're seeing polls now of people in the 25 to 50 age bracket who feel they have no hope, that they're going to forever be burdened and have to face a financial burden unlike anything we had to. Now, some are choosing to blame boomers. It's my fault somehow, and I can understand they're not aware what we had to go through and get to where we got. But that's the real big challenge here, and that's why I think Trump has a very short time frame now. And if somehow, as you and I record this, we don't know, I think his bill's going to get through because they'll give enough pork to the few guys who are not helping to put the package. But I think when we look at it, it didn't do the things originally everybody thought it would be. And then the challenge is going to come for him that he's going to lose some of the support in Congress. And before you know it, after this November, they're getting ready for the next general election. And that's when I think they really step back and he has more of a difficulty. So he has a very short window now to get across many of the things that we just thought in this, when he first took office, seemed like it was going to happen. And unfortunately, I think the odds are against him.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about the last time we spoke, and that you've already mentioned again in this conversation, is around housing. And you mentioned that so many of your clients now come in with mortgages where they didn't have that in the past. We talked last time about how Stephen and I are on a house hunt and what that's looking like for us. And one of the things that we've discovered, getting back to your idea of sort of a generational gap, is younger people are actually not as excited about home ownership as maybe your generation or my generation were. We were raised still in this American dream that, you get a job, you get married, you buy a house, that's your greatest asset, your biggest investment, and it will pay back for you. And younger people are actually now saying, buying a house was the worst mistake I ever made. I'm married to my mortgage. I can't make ends meet. I don't know what exactly is going on there. I think probably they're buying too much house. They're buying in areas where they can't really afford to be. They don't want to make those um, concessions that maybe you and Mary made when you were younger, and live outside and commute in, things like that. I don't know, but it's it seems to be a distinct shift in attitude, and at the same time, the market, it just doesn't make sense right now, where prices are at, where mortgage rates are at, buyers and sellers just not being able to come together. So I just wanted to kind of move the conversation a little bit to that, and get your take on what things look like. I know you're not in the housing market right now, but what things look like from your perspective versus 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because you have that great perspective on it.
So housing affordability level is at the worst ever. So that's one of the reasons why they could be quite upset. Interest rates have not come down as many people expected it would, causing quite an issue uh, into that affordability. But it's also causing an issue for the banks that still own a lot of debt on their books that's still underwater. I think the other thing that clearly is over with, and that's the big home.
Mhm.
Uh, if they do buy, it's going to be much smaller size homes. They realize they don't need the huge monstrosities with long driveways and things of that nature. I think the other thing that's coming from that also is that one of the reasons prices haven't come down yet, but this could be, it will be, is how much private equity had entered the housing industry.
Mhm.
They've entered not to sell homes. They don't want people buying homes. They want them to rent it from them.
Right.
That's the money where they see it's going to be. And it's kind of playing into hands because they're forcing more people to rent and all. And for a time frame, That shrunk the amount of houses that might be for sale. But now we're seeing in a lot of major cities, even with that played out, we're starting to see homes have to be offered for less money to get any type of interest for those that still need to sell their homes. And the other interesting thing is, just a side note, and we had a little person come into our office to talk to us about, because they were in the pitch reverse home mortgages, but they brought out an interesting statistic: is how many boomers are not leaving their homes.
Mm.
Many people were expecting them to have left their homes for one reason or another, including that they have the debt, they took family back in, et cetera, et cetera. And so the housing industry is not in good shape at all. And coming to a point where, uh, take Florida as an example. I would not want to own a condo, especially if it's 20 years or older, because the maintenance costs is now, because of what they have to do to make them safer and all that other
Right.
kind of stuff. And people knowing that I don't want to buy this condo and get an assessment a year from now that's, I can't even afford to pay, and so forth and so on. So there's a lot of individual reasons in certain sectors of the housing industry all around the United States to impact it. Here, New Jersey, the taxes are just, people getting to the point that even if you say, wow, my house went up, I can't even live it anymore because I still only make less money, and my taxes now are through the roof.
Yeah.
Part of the thing that's holding up the bill, because the states where that you were able to deduct the full amount of your mortgage, like New York, I think it's California, a couple others, want to get that into the bill because they want to get relief for their citizens. So the housing industry is interesting. And then I know, because you guys wrote something up, if I remember correctly, not too long ago, about what's happened with private equity. The
Yeah.
big shock, like I have, the thing I hear now from, I'll give you the wealthier clients that come in, either in that top 10%. I got a lot of money, Grandich, in private equity. I'm knocking it out of the park. And I tell them, I says, well, let me tell you something about private equity that you don't know. How much of it fails, and how many private equity deals that took companies that were public and take them out in LBO go into bankruptcy.
Yeah.
They're shocked.
Yeah.
I wasn't shown that. Of course you weren't shown that. I'm not
Yeah.
shocked you weren't shown that. And I know that, I'm playing up because I know that you've talked about it. That's an area that's only going to start first hearing stories when eventual downturn comes in the general stock market. People that thought private equity was like a safety valve, I can't miss with private equity. Huh, you'd be surprised.
Yeah, no, it was actually one of the things I did want to talk to you about, because we touched on it a little bit in our last conversation. And then in the subsequent weeks, we did write about it on Collapse Life. And I think it's a really big issue that is not talked about enough, how much private equity. So for the top end of the scale, like the people that you were just talking about, it's somewhere where they can invest their money, and private equity firms are um, they're designed to make their investors money. So great. If you're at that top end of the scale, good for you. But for the other end, that other 50% of the economy that you were talking about, I don't think people realize how much of their lives are ruled by these private equity firms. Their houses, their healthcare, very often their jobs, because private equity firms own the businesses that pay the kind of lower end salaries in fast food and retail and things like that, nursing homes, daycares, ambulances. I mean, it's just this vast network that is owned by companies that have nothing but profit. And these are a lot of times services that are supposed to be public interest. So I don't want to go into too much of the explanation, but I did want to ask you, do you think that trend, and particularly going back to housing, do you think that trend is going to continue, where private equity owns more and more of the homes and the average American is a tenant rather than a homeowner?
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. In my retirement write up, I stress to people that part of the things that, because Americans living longer, the need for uh, long term care, if you want to call it, nursing home, we saw a tremendous drop off in the numbers, but the ones that do exist are now more private equity. And Where are governments having more troubles with the operators? From the private equity groups, because everything is a penny. Everything is, there's no human elements being
Right.
removed from those type of things, and it's really coming back to bite people. There's not going to be the availability, and when you talk about now what it is to go into any type of elder care on a full-time basis, even if it's assisted living or worse yet, Alzheimer's or dementia, only that top echelon is going to afford that. And everybody goes, well, if you're on Medicaid, you don't want to go to the places. We have one here because it's an extension of the food bank that we deal with. And I went there, and I have to tell you, it was one of the saddest days of my life when I saw
Wow.
how those people who are on a Medicaid assistant, and this was a nursing home, you want to die. That's how I left there. And there isn't enough I could have done other than to change one or two of those people's lives, and that would be it. And
Yeah.
unless you get a 10,000 other Grandiches, most of those people are going to. And so private equity, and here's the other sale about private equity. Don't think everybody, just because they get in early, makes money. Like everything else, I don't know if I ever told you this. If I did, sorry for repeating me, but it's worth knowing. Let me tell you how people come to money. One, they inherited it. They're not
Mhm.
the original people. Someone before them made it, and now they're the second or ninth generation, and they live off of that. Two, they invested in commercial real estate, and that's changed because commercial real estate, especially with office buildings and all, is not the same now as it was. But for the most part, it was commercial real estate. Three, they were entrepreneurs, small,
Mhm.
mid-sized business owners. It's only two times the finances world comes to play. One, they either worked in the financial service industry, became an advisor, whatever, and lived off well because of that, or they worked for a public company, were fairly well up, got a lot of stock options, and made money that way.
Right.
I don't think in 42 years I've met two or three families who go, "Oh, mom, dad, they were smart enough. They put 5, 10,000 a year into the stock market and they made a few million." That's very, very rare. And one of the things that people assume is in private equity, I'm an insider. I'm getting in and they know how to manage it and they're going to sell it to somebody for a lot more than I paid. It's a no brainer. That's what I hear now. And I hear it here in my community from people that some of them are well off and that's where they've parked their money.
Mhm.
And the the surprise is going to be is how much private equity has actually been failing because the
Right.
same people who gave that financial advice for the last several decades and Nobel laureate studies showed that 80% of all money managers underperformed if you simply would have just put your money in an index fund. And I say to people, you wouldn't go to a doctor or a lawyer if 80% of them failed versus others, but you go to these people, they're the same people basically running the private equity. Now, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Private equity to the people that make hundreds of millions, they got the top brains. People there are a lot smarter on average. But the private equity that Joe Schmo can invest in now, because that's one of the things Wall Street sells now, investments into private equities.
Mhm.
They're not rocket scientists. They're just not. And I'm afraid people go into the assumption, and again, it's the upper echelon, the upper class, but they think it's a no brainer, and it's far from a no brainer.
Do you think those kinds of deals are being packaged in the same way that subprime mortgages were? And do you think that they present as much of a systemic risk to the economy as the mortgages did in 2008?
No, the subprime mortgages was the biggest scam of our lifetime. Think about this, and think about no one really went to jail about it. That's the ultimate irony to it. So Wall Street had a product, and they knew it was going to fail. And how did they know it was going to fail? Because they sold it to a group who shouldn't be buying it in the first place. And they took the other side of it, meaning they sold what they sold to them without owning it. They shorted it to them on
Yeah.
the basis it would collapse, not work out, and make money. So not only do they make money on the commission or fee that was built into the original product, but then when it failed, they also profited from it. And then when they failed because they took too much exposure, the very people that lost out as citizens got tax money to bail those people out for what they did. That was the ultimate scam. That's far worse than cryptocurrency ever will be and all. And yet, nobody went to real jail of anything. And they're out there, as a lot of people say, the people that did that are now in cryptocurrency. That's why a lot of the NFTs and a mem coin. Can I just tell you this? And I don't want to go off the. Anybody buys a mem coin, don't come crying to whoever you bought it from, because I rather have a pile of duty, because duty I can turn into fertilizer. A mem coin is only the greatest fool theory. It has no other use other than, please God, somebody pay more than I did so I can make money on it. And yet, look at these things where they're going. There's a thing called the fart coin. If that's not going to be what historians look back a generation or two now and go, man, we should have known those guys' grandparents were crazy. They something fart coin went to $2 or $3 a coin. It's just insanity. But that's
I
part
know.
of the bubble and all. But what I'm just saying is, I don't think the private equity is anywhere as bad. There's real assets that they're doing. What I think is happening is, as the economy matured, they started paying a lot more for assets than they might have would otherwise in order to continue their business. So people that bought private equity stuff 10 or 20 years ago, I think are in far less risk than people that are going into private equity now, because I think the asset or the availability to those companies to buy assets are too expensive. Now, if we're correct and things get really bad and those companies stayed in cash and they can start picking off, assets that have fallen 60, 70, 80%. But I think the timing would be bad now to first be going into private equity in general.
Right. Well, Peter, there's still so much I want to talk to you about, but we will have to do it another time because I've taken a lot of your time. But as we close, we've talked about some of the risks, some of the massive changes that are happening. You've given people some good practical steps that they can be taking. What are your final thoughts? What do you want to leave the audience with as we close?
Well, I've gone down a road and I just wrote a big report about it. And, I'm 69 years old. I'm 42 years in this business. I am in the stretch for both life itself and, of course, my career. And I really think that there are important things to do here now. I take this philosophy of a live chicken versus a dead duck serious. I think the older you are, the less risk, no matter what kind of wealth you may have. Because if we're right or even half right of some of the things we've talked about and didn't even get a chance to talk about, you won't have the time to recover and make up for it. I also think that things in my book need to be biblically and spiritually based. I think if it doesn't pass that acid test, it's not worth taking that opportunity on. And unfortunately, we live in a world now where those who choose to live life like that are frowned upon by a bigger growing society that believes basically in relativism. They're either agnostic or they're actually uh, atheists, and
Yeah.
it's becoming harder. And I'm not just talking about the Christian faith. If anybody that's practicing a faith, and then the biggest one, and this is the killer of all killers, and I shouldn't even. I just realized killer was not the right word to use. But the 11th problem now, I've had 10 for a long time, but I've added 11th. And it was in a state that you're in that it's shocking that it's been happening. But I do believe the Islamic movement worldwide, which is in their faith. It's called upon to expand, immigrate, and embrace and get in and change where it is to that faith. It clashes completely with Western civilization. Western civilization can never survive in equal terms with it. We're seeing it now already in Europe. We have already seen dramatic changes in places
Yeah.
like France and England, even Ireland, even Canada. And now here in the US, we're seeing it. And people go, well, it's not too bad to worry about. And I said, well, just, what you should do? Read the news of UK and France 10 years ago. If you want to know where we're at now, read it then. And so I think another challenge that we're all going to have to face, many of us still in our own lifetime, is how we've lived as Americans on moral based Judeo Christian or whatever you want to call it is now challenged more than ever. We might have got a respite with Trump on some levels. But if somehow that doesn't pick up speed and continue with the next administration, it could become very, very difficult to live a life that our parents lived, at least from a faith based thing. And that's probably, I think, the biggest concern. Because if you don't believe in anything after, I can understand. Why do you care? Why do I got to listen to this guy Grandich for? It doesn't matter. But if you have that, then I think it's very, very important. And I think you have to get back to basics. And I think we have to, uh, so some people blow off the dust of that book that might have been sitting in the house for quite a while. I'll tell you this much, if I may, just extend another minute. There's more in that book about finances that'll be positive for your life than any book, including my own, and no offense to what you do, written. It has more verses in scripture about matters of finance and things related to finance than there is even about what you think the ultimate two topics are, heaven or hell.
Mhm.
The parables are about that. And the last mistake that people make about that good book is they think it's a book of don'ts when it's actually a book of do's. And I think it's something that can be very, very useful at this time to embrace and to understand and help you live your life out. It certainly is the way that my wife and I do and hope to do for the rest of our natural lives.
Amen. Well, thank you for that, and I think that's a great way to end. For anyone who is not already reading you and following you, please remind them how they can find you, because you put out regular content on your website, on your X channel, and a lot of it has to do with what you just said. And you share amazing videos for people who are maybe interested and don't really know where to start. So just remind people how they can find you and follow you.
Well, I appreciate that because some people that don't believe what I said would have hung up on us several minutes ago. So those that are still here, there is petergrandich.com. That's the website that kind of explains everything. It has all my writings and books and things of that nature. There is a YouTube channel where I'm blessed to put great interviews like this. Not only that when you interview me, but when I get to interview you. And then, of course, there's my X page, which has really become my main way of communicating to people. It's instantaneous, it's fast, it's somewhat fun. I have a little fun with it as well. And I think the combination of all three is, but it's not an advisory service. I don't walk on water. I can write a book about how to lose money as much as I can write a book about how to make money. But I do appreciate these opportunities. And I really believe this chat that we had is a gift from God and that someone somewhere will have benefited from it from otherwise if they didn't hear it. And that's what we need to live for.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. This has been a blessing as always. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will have to do it again soon.
Can I ask you one question while we're still
Please.
taping?
Yeah.
What's the name of my friend in the back that was lying there for a while?
That was Elvis. He's our
Elvis is
10
alive. Elvis
he
is
is, he never
alive.
left the building. Yeah. He's our 10-year-old greyhound from Ireland.
Great.
Um, and he's the love of our lives. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. And animals are a true gift from God, and they know undying love. You'll
Yeah.
never have an animal that you go, boy, it really left me and left me high and dry. No, when everything else left, that dog or cat or whatever is going to still be by your side.
Incredible loyalty. Yes. We're blessed to have three, Elvis and Dobby and Asher, and they are wonderful.
Does Elvis sing to him? You don't mind if I ask, do you?
He does sing. He does sing. I don't know if he'll want to sing right now. Elvis, do you want to sing? No, not right now, Peter. Next
It's
time.
not his time of night. It's late at night when he's used to being.
I promise you next time we'll get him to sing for you.
All right. My best to you and your husband. I really hope any of my folks that are watching this, if you haven't already, please start reading and watching Collapse Life. This is a couple that are doing what most Americans should be doing. They're trying their hardest to live a life that the Lord has taught us and also to be upfront about things that maybe some other people won't share with you. So I hope many people who may not have been listening to you and follow me will be following you now after this interview.
Thank you so much, Peter. If God wills it, we welcome anyone who wants to follow us. So we just thank you for everything you keep doing and for all the support that you keep sending our way. We're truly grateful.
Amen. God bless you.
Amen. It is always a special day when we get to spend this kind of time with Peter Grandich on the podcast. And so we thank him for joining us, and we thank you for being with us as well. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, and definitely share it with others who need to hear this. You can learn more about us at collapselife.com, and you can sign up for our newsletter while you're there. And if you like what you see, please support us on our Buy Me a Coffee page. Every cup helps us find stories that would otherwise go unnoticed, and it helps support brilliant conversations with people like Peter. We hope to see you again next week. And until then, just remember to keep your chin up. It's only collapse. See you soon.